This is the story of one of the darkest chapters in criminal history in the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas, 1902. Before we begin, I invite you to leave the like button pressed and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your location right now. In the autumn of 1902, the remote valleys of the Ozark Mountains harbored secrets that would challenge the very foundations of Christian faith in rural Arkansas. The settlement of Cedar Hollow, population barely 200 souls, nestled between steep ridges covered in ancient oak and hickory, seemed an unlikely place for one of the most disturbing religious scandals in American frontier history. Samuel Whitmore arrived in Cedar Hollow in the spring of 1901, a tall, gaunt man of 47 years with piercing grey eyes and a voice that could command absolute silence in any congregation. According to records preserved in the Arkansas State Archives, Whitmore claimed to have received his calling directly from God during a vision in the Tennessee wilderness. The small Baptist church of Cedar Hollow, without a permanent minister for over 2 years, welcomed him with open arms. Within 18 months, 23 members of his congregation would vanish without explanation. 7 bodies would be discovered in circumstances so disturbing that local authorities sealed the official reports for over 60 years. The survivors who emerged from Whitmore's influence would carry psychological scars that medical professionals of the era could neither explain nor treat. What began as a story of religious revival would transform into something far more sinister, something that challenged not only the laws of man, but the very nature of reality itself. Samuel Whitmore's arrival in Cedar Hollow was documented in the Cedar Hollow Gazette of April 15, 1901. The brief article, preserved in the Newton County Historical Society archives, describes him as a man of evident learning and deep spiritual conviction, bearing letters of recommendation from congregations in Tennessee and Kentucky. These letters, according to church records maintained by the Cedar Hollow Baptist Church and later transferred to the Arkansas Baptist Convention archives, praised Whitmore's ability to bring the lost sheep back to the fold and his unique understanding of the deeper mysteries of Christian faith. The congregation that welcomed Whitmore consisted primarily of farming families who had settled the valley in the 1870s and 1880s. The Hendersons, the Millers, the Blackwoods, the Carters, and the Stones formed the core of the community. These were hard-working, God-fearing people who had carved their lives from the unforgiving Ozark wilderness. Whitmore's early sermons, according to diary entries preserved by Martha Henderson and discovered in 1963 during the demolition of the old Henderson farmhouse, were conventional in their theology, but extraordinary in their delivery. Martha wrote on May 3, 1901, "Brother Whitmore speaks with such authority that even the children sit perfectly still. When he describes the torments of hell, you can feel the heat. When he speaks of heaven's glory, the very air seems to shimmer." The first indication that Whitmore's ministry might be taking an unusual direction came in the autumn of 1901. Church attendance records show that regular Sunday services began extending far beyond their traditional 1-hour duration. By November, according to Martha Henderson's diary, services were lasting 4 to 5 hours, with congregants remaining in apparent trances long after Whitmore had finished speaking. "Brother Whitmore says we must prepare ourselves for a great revelation," Martha wrote on November 18, 1901. "He speaks of ancient truths that were hidden from the early church, truths that God has chosen to reveal to us in these final days. Some of the older members seem troubled, but when Brother Whitmore looks at you with those grey eyes, all doubts fade away." The winter of 1901-1902 brought changes that would later be described by survivors as the time when everything began to go wrong. According to testimony given to Sheriff James Morrison in 1903, Whitmore began conducting what he called deeper ceremonies, in addition to regular Sunday services. These gatherings, held on Wednesday evenings, were restricted to what Whitmore termed the truly faithful. Thomas Blackwood, one of only 3 men to survive the events that followed, provided a detailed account to investigators in 1903. His testimony, preserved in the Newton County Sheriff's Department files, describes ceremonies that began with conventional prayer and hymn singing, but gradually evolved into something far more disturbing. Brother Whitmore would have us form a circle in the church basement, Blackwood testified. He'd place candles at specific points around the room, not random-like, but in patterns he said came from ancient Christian texts. He claimed these patterns had been used by the apostles themselves, hidden from the Roman persecutors. The basement of the Cedar Hollow Baptist Church, according to architectural surveys conducted in 1963, was an unusual feature for rural churches of that era. Built into the hillside behind the main structure, it consisted of a single large room with stone walls and a dirt floor. Church construction records, if they ever existed, have been lost to time. Blackwood's testimony continues. At first, the ceremonies seemed like deeper prayer. Meetings. Brother Whitmore would read from books he said were older than the Bible, written in languages none of us recognized. He'd translate as he read, speaking of angels and demons, of powers that existed before creation, of ways to commune directly with the divine. By February 1902, according to multiple survivor accounts, the Wednesday ceremonies had evolved into something that bore little resemblance to conventional Christian worship. Participants reported experiencing visions, speaking in tongues, and entering trance states that lasted for hours. Some claimed to have received direct communications from biblical figures. Others described encounters with beings they could only describe as not quite angels, but not quite human either. Martha Henderson's diary entries from this period become increasingly erratic and disturbing. Her entry from February 14, 1902 reads, "The visions are becoming clearer. Brother Whitmore says this is because we are growing closer to the truth. Last night I saw my deceased mother standing in the corner of my bedroom, but her face was wrong somehow. When I told Brother Whitmore, he smiled and said the dead are trying to communicate with us, to warn us of what is coming." The first disappearance occurred on March 3, 1902. According to Sheriff Morrison's investigation report, dated March 10, 1902, and preserved in the Arkansas State Archives, 16-year-old Sarah Miller failed to return home after attending one of Whitmore's Wednesday ceremonies. Her parents, Jacob and Ruth Miller, reported that Sarah had seemed changed in recent weeks, spending long hours in prayer and claiming to hear voices calling her name. A search of the surrounding forest yielded no trace of Sarah Miller. Her disappearance might have been attributed to the dangers of the wilderness. Bears, wolves, and treacherous terrain claimed lives regularly in the Ozarks, had it not been for the discovery made 3 days later. On March 6, 1902, hunters found Sarah Miller's clothing arranged in a perfect circle, in a clearing approximately 2 miles from the church. The clothes were undamaged, showing no signs of animal interference or violent removal. At the center of the circle, according to the sheriff's report, was a symbol carved into the earth, a complex geometric pattern that none of the investigators could identify. More disturbing was the condition of the clearing itself. Despite the early spring season, no grass or vegetation grew within the circle formed by Sarah's clothing. The soil appeared scorched, though there was no evidence of fire. Local farmers reported that their livestock refused to enter the area, and hunting dogs would not track beyond the clearing's perimeter. The second disappearance followed within a week. On March 11, 1902, elderly widow Constance Stone vanished after attending Sunday service. Unlike Sarah Miller, Constance was found, or rather, what remained of her was found. The discovery, made by her neighbor William Carter on March 13th, would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. Carter's statement to Sheriff Morrison, preserved in the case files, describes finding Constance Stone's body in her own root cellar, arranged in what he could only describe as a position of prayer but wrong somehow. The body showed no signs of violence, no wounds or trauma that might explain her death. According to the coroner's report filed by Dr. Marcus Webb, Constance Stone appeared to have died of natural causes, despite being in apparent good health just days before. What disturbed investigators was the condition of the cellar itself. The walls, previously lined with shelves of preserved foods, had been covered with symbols similar to those found at Sarah Miller's disappearance site. These markings, according to Dr. Webb's notes, appeared to have been carved with fingernails rather than tools. Most unsettling of all, the symbols seemed to continue beyond what human hands could reach, extending across the ceiling and into corners that would have been impossible to access. Sheriff James Morrison's investigation into the disappearances began in earnest following the discovery of Constance Stone's body. Morrison, a veteran lawman who had served Newton County for over 15 years, initially approached the case as a conventional criminal matter. His investigation files, preserved in the Arkansas State Archives and unsealed in 1963, reveal a methodical attempt to apply standard investigative procedures to increasingly inexplicable circumstances. Morrison's first step was to interview Samuel Whitmore directly. The transcript of this interview, conducted on March 15, 1902, provides insight into Whitmore's demeanor and responses during the early stages of the investigation. When questioned about the disappearances, Whitmore expressed appropriate concern and offered his full cooperation. He claimed no knowledge of Sarah Miller's whereabouts and suggested that Constance Stone's death, while tragic, was likely the result of her advanced age and the harsh winter conditions. However, Morrison noted several disturbing details in his private case notes. Whitmore's responses, while cooperative, seemed rehearsed. More unsettling was the preacher's apparent lack of emotional reaction to the deaths of his parishioners. Morrison wrote, "Subject maintains perfect composure throughout questioning, shows no signs of grief or distress that would be expected from a spiritual leader who has lost members of his flock. When pressed for details about recent church activities, becomes evasive without appearing deliberately deceptive." Morrison's investigation expanded to include interviews with surviving congregation members. These interviews, conducted between March 16th and March 25th, 1902, revealed a pattern of psychological disturbance among Whitmore's followers that the sheriff was ill-equipped to understand or address. Thomas Blackwood, interviewed on March 18th, provided the most coherent account of the Wednesday ceremonies. However, even Blackwood's testimony contained elements that challenged rational explanation. He described participants entering trance states during which they claimed to receive visions of biblical events, but with disturbing variations from accepted scripture. According to Blackwood, these visions often featured familiar biblical figures engaging in activities that were unholy and contrary to Christian teaching. Martha Henderson, interviewed on March 20th, was less coherent in her responses. Morrison's notes describe her as agitated and prone to speaking in fragments. Henderson claimed that the ceremonies had opened her mind to truths that ordinary Christians cannot comprehend. She insisted that Sarah Miller and Constance Stone had not died or disappeared, but had been translated to a higher plane of existence as preparation for a coming revelation. Most disturbing was Henderson's claim that she continued to see and speak with both missing women. According to her statement, Sarah Miller visited her nightly, appearing in her bedroom to discuss the beautiful things she had learned on the other side. Henderson described these visitations in detail, noting that Sarah appeared exactly as she had in life, except for her eyes, which Henderson described as black as midnight, but somehow full of light. Dr. Marcus Webb, the county coroner who had examined Constance Stone's body, provided Morrison with a medical perspective on the case. Webb's report, dated March 22, 1902, acknowledged the unusual circumstances surrounding Stone's death, but attempted to provide rational explanations. He attributed the strange symbols in the cellar to post-mortem hallucinations experienced by the discoverer, and suggested that the apparent lack of decomposition in Stone's body was due to the cool, dry conditions of the root cellar. However, Webb's private correspondence with a colleague in Little Rock, discovered in 1965 among his personal papers, reveals his true concerns about the case. In a letter dated March 25, 1902, Webb wrote, "I have examined hundreds of bodies in my career, but I have never encountered anything like what I found in that cellar. The woman appeared to have died peacefully, yet every instinct tells me that something unnatural occurred. The symbols on the walls were not carved by human hands. The precision and uniformity are beyond what any person could achieve, particularly in the confined space of a root cellar." The investigation took a more ominous turn on March 28, 1902, when Morrison attempted to search the Cedar Hollow Baptist Church. According to his report, Whitmore initially granted permission for the search, but became increasingly agitated as Morrison and his deputy, William Hayes, examined the basement where the Wednesday ceremonies had been conducted. The basement, according to Morrison's detailed description, showed clear evidence of unusual activities. The dirt floor bore traces of the same geometric symbols found at the previous crime scenes. More disturbing were the stains on the stone walls, dark patches that appeared to be blood, though they tested negative for human blood when examined by Dr. Webb. Morrison's search was interrupted by the arrival of several congregation members, led by Martha Henderson. The group, according to Deputy Hayes's supplementary report, appeared to be in some form of trance state. They entered the basement and began chanting in what Hayes described as no language I have ever heard, but somehow familiar, as if I should understand it. The chanting continued for approximately 10 minutes, during which Morrison reported experiencing severe disorientation and nausea. When the chanting stopped, the congregation members filed out of the basement without speaking. Whitmore, who had remained silent during the entire incident, simply stated that the search was complete and asked the officers to leave. Morrison's investigation was further complicated by the reluctance of local residents to cooperate. Many of Whitmore's followers refused to speak with law enforcement, claiming that their religious practices were protected by constitutional guarantees of religious freedom. Others provided contradictory accounts that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify the circumstances surrounding the disappearances. The Newton County Gazette, in its March 30, 1902 edition, reported on the investigation with obvious frustration. Sheriff Morrison continues his inquiry into the recent tragic events in Cedar Hollow, but has been hampered by the uncooperative attitude of certain residents. While we respect the rights of all citizens to practice their faith freely, we must question whether activities that result in death and disappearance can truly be considered religious in nature. The newspaper's editorial stance reflected growing concern among the broader community about events in Cedar Hollow. Letters to the editor, published throughout April 1902, revealed a population divided between those who viewed Whitmore as a legitimate religious leader being persecuted for his unconventional methods, and those who believed something genuinely sinister was occurring in the isolated valley. The Cedar Hollow case might have remained a footnote in Arkansas criminal history had it not attracted the attention of Dr. Eleanor Hartwell, a professor of religious studies at the University of Arkansas in 1967. Dr. Hartwell, whose doctoral dissertation had focused on unconventional religious movements in the American South, encountered references to the Whitmore case while researching frontier religious practices for a book on Ozark folk beliefs. Dr. Hartwell's initial interest was purely academic. According to her research notes, preserved in the University of Arkansas Special Collections, she viewed the Cedar Hollow incidents as an example of how isolation and hardship could lead to the development of syncretic religious practices that blended Christian theology with older, pre-Christian beliefs. Her preliminary research, conducted in the summer of 1967, involved reviewing the available historical records and conducting interviews with elderly residents of Newton County who might have family connections to the original events. What Dr. Hartwell discovered during this initial research phase convinced her that the Cedar Hollow case deserved more serious scholarly attention. Her research journal, dated July 15, 1967, notes, "The official records tell only part of the story. There are too many inconsistencies, too many gaps in the documentation. More significantly, the psychological effects on survivors and their descendants suggest trauma far beyond what would be expected from conventional religious persecution or even criminal activity." Dr. Hartwell's methodology was rigorous and systematic. She began by creating a comprehensive timeline of events based on all available official documents. She then sought out descendants of the original participants, conducting oral history interviews to gather family stories and traditions that might have been passed down through generations. Finally, she attempted to locate any physical evidence that might still exist from the original incidents. Her breakthrough came in September 1967, when she gained access to previously sealed records in the Newton County Sheriff's Department. These files, which had been restricted due to their disturbing content, contained detailed photographs of the crime scenes, witness statements that had been deemed too inflammatory for public release, and Sheriff Morrison's private case notes. The photographs, according to Dr. Hartwell's analysis, revealed details that had been omitted from the official reports. The symbols found at various locations were not random markings, but formed part of a coherent system that Dr. Hartwell recognized from her studies of medieval occult texts. More disturbing were the photographs of Constance Stone's body, which showed evidence of what Dr. Hartwell described as ritualistic positioning that suggested knowledge of ancient burial practices. Dr. Hartwell's most significant discovery came through her interviews with descendants of the survivors. Thomas Blackwood's grandson, Robert Blackwood, provided her with a collection of documents that his grandfather had hidden in the walls of his house before his death in 1934. These documents, which Robert had discovered during renovation work in 1965, included a detailed diary that Thomas Blackwood had kept during the events of 1902. Blackwood's diary, written in a mixture of English and what appeared to be phonetic transcriptions of the unknown language used in Whitmore's ceremonies, provided an insider's perspective on the progression of events. According to Dr. Hartwell's translation notes, the diary revealed that Whitmore's influence over his congregation was far more extensive than official records suggested. Participants in the Wednesday ceremonies were not merely attending religious services, but were being systematically indoctrinated into beliefs and practices that bore little resemblance to conventional Christianity. The diary entries from February and March 1902 describe ceremonies that involved what Blackwood termed communion with entities that claimed to be angels, but whose appearance and behavior suggested otherwise. These beings, according to Blackwood's descriptions, provided Whitmore with instructions for rituals that would prepare the faithful for translation to a higher plane of existence. Most disturbing were Blackwood's accounts of the disappearances themselves. According to his diary, Sarah Miller and Constance Stone had not vanished unexpectedly, but had volunteered for what Whitmore described as the ultimate demonstration of faith. The ceremonies that preceded their disappearances involved rituals that Blackwood could only describe as the opening of doorways that should remain closed. Dr. Hartwell's research took an unexpected turn in November 1967 when she decided to visit the actual location of the Cedar Hollow Baptist Church. The building had been abandoned since 1903 and had fallen into severe disrepair, but the basement where Whitmore's ceremonies had been conducted remained largely intact. Her initial survey of the site, conducted with the assistance of graduate student Michael Torres, revealed that the symbols described in the original investigation reports were still visible on the basement walls. More significantly, Dr. Hartwell discovered additional markings that had apparently been overlooked by the 1902 investigators. These symbols, carved deeper into the stone than the others, formed what Dr. Hartwell recognized as a complex geometric pattern similar to those found in medieval grimoires and occult texts. Dr. Hartwell's field notes from November 18, 1967, describe an unsettling experience during her examination of the basement. The temperature in the basement appears to be significantly lower than the ambient air temperature outside, despite the lack of any obvious source of cooling. More disturbing is the acoustic quality of the space. Sounds seem to echo in ways that are inconsistent with the room's dimensions. Michael reported hearing whispers in what he described as the same language from the diary, transcriptions, though I heard nothing. The following day, Dr. Hartwell returned to the site alone to conduct photographic documentation of the symbols. Her camera, a professional-grade instrument that had functioned perfectly throughout her research, malfunctioned repeatedly in the basement. The photographs that were successfully taken showed strange distortions and shadows that could not be explained by lighting conditions or equipment failure. Dr. Hartwell's research notes from November 20th, 1967, reveal growing concern about the psychological effects of her investigation. I'm experiencing difficulty sleeping and concentrating. The symbols from the basement seem to remain visible even when I close my eyes. Michael has reported similar symptoms and has requested to be reassigned to a different project. I am beginning to understand why the original investigators sealed these records. Despite these concerns, Dr. Hartwell continued her research through the winter of 1967-1968. Her investigation expanded to include consultation with experts in medieval history, comparative religion, and abnormal psychology. Dr. James Whitfield, a professor of medieval studies at Yale University, examined photographs of the basement symbols and confirmed Dr. Hartwell's suspicion that they were derived from European occult traditions dating to the 13th century. Dr. Margaret Sinclair, a psychiatrist at the Arkansas State Hospital, reviewed Dr. Hartwell's interviews with descendants of the survivors and noted patterns of psychological trauma that seemed to persist across generations. According to Dr. Sinclair's analysis, the descendants exhibited symptoms consistent with inherited trauma, but with unusual characteristics that suggested exposure to experiences beyond conventional psychological categories. Dr. Hartwell's final research report, completed in March 1968, concluded that the Cedar Hollow incidents represented a genuine case of occult practice that had resulted in psychological and possibly physical harm to participants. Her report recommended further investigation by qualified experts in paranormal phenomena, but the University of Arkansas declined to support additional research, citing concerns about the project's academic credibility. Dr. Hartwell's disappearance occurred on April 3, 1968, during what was intended to be her final visit to the Cedar Hollow site. According to her research assistant, she had planned to conduct one last photographic survey of the basement before concluding her investigation. When she failed to return to her hotel that evening, local authorities were notified. The search for Dr. Hartwell continued for 2 weeks before being suspended due to lack of leads. Her rental car was found parked near the abandoned church, locked and undisturbed. Her camera and research materials were missing. The only trace of her presence was a single photograph, found wedged between stones in the church basement wall, showing what appeared to be a human figure standing in the shadows at the far end of the room. The photograph, when examined by experts, revealed no clear details of the figure's identity or appearance. However, several observers noted that the figure's proportions seemed somehow wrong, as if the image had been distorted by an unknown photographic effect. The photograph was filed with Dr. Hartwell's research materials and sealed by university administrators. The Cedar Hollow case remained dormant in academic circles until 1985, when a series of incidents in the Ozark region began to attract attention from paranormal researchers and law enforcement agencies. These modern occurrences, while geographically dispersed across Arkansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma, shared disturbing similarities with the events documented in 1902. The first contemporary incident was reported by the Arkansas State Police on June 15, 1985. A family of 4, Robert and Linda Morrison and their 2 teenage children, disappeared while camping in the Buffalo National River area, approximately 40 miles from the original Cedar Hollow location. Their campsite was found undisturbed, with no signs of struggle or hasty departure. Personal belongings, including wallets and jewelry, remained untouched. The investigation, led by Detective Carl Brennan of the Arkansas State Police, initially focused on conventional explanations: animal attacks, accidental drowning, or foul play by unknown perpetrators. However, the discovery of unusual markings carved into trees surrounding the campsite prompted Brennan to consult historical records for similar cases. Brennan's investigation report, filed on July 20, 1985, notes the striking similarity between the tree carvings and symbols documented in the 1902 Cedar Hollow case. The detective's private notes, obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests in 1995, reveal his growing conviction that the Morrison family disappearance was connected to the historical incidents. "The symbols are identical," Brennan wrote in his personal case journal. "Not similar, identical. Either someone with access to the sealed 1902 records is deliberately recreating these markings, or we're dealing with something that has persisted in this region for over 80 years. The Morrison family was never found. The case remains open in Arkansas State Police files, though active investigation was suspended in 1987 due to lack of leads. A second incident occurred in October 1987 when park rangers at Devil's Den State Park reported the discovery of an abandoned campsite containing evidence of what they described as ritualistic activity. The site, located in a remote section of the park, contained a circle of stones arranged in the same geometric pattern documented at Cedar Hollow. At the center of the circle, rangers found the personal effects of 3 individuals who had registered for camping permits but had never checked out. Park Superintendent James Crawford's incident report describes the scene in detail. The arrangement of stones showed clear evidence of deliberate construction. The precision of the geometric pattern suggests knowledge of advanced mathematical principles. More disturbing were the organic materials found within the circle. What appeared to be animal remains arranged in specific positions, though no identifiable species could be determined. The 3 missing campers, college students from the University of Arkansas, were never located, despite extensive search operations. Their case files, maintained by the Arkansas State Police, contain photographs of the stone circle that show remarkable similarity to historical descriptions of Whitmore's ceremonial arrangements. Dr. Patricia Vance, a folklore professor at Arkansas State University, became interested in these modern incidents after reading about them in local newspapers. Her research, conducted between 1988 and 1991, attempted to establish connections between the contemporary disappearances and the historical Cedar Hollow case. Dr. Vance's methodology involved extensive interviews with local residents, particularly elderly individuals who might have family connections to the original events. Her research revealed a persistent oral tradition in the Ozark region concerning what locals referred to as the Whitmore curse, a belief that the preacher's activities in 1902 had somehow opened doorways that remained active. One of Dr. Vance's most significant interviews was conducted with Mary Blackwood Henderson, the great-granddaughter of both Thomas Blackwood and Martha Henderson. Mary, born in 1923, had grown up hearing family stories about the Cedar Hollow incidents. According to her account, recorded by Dr. Vance in September 1989, the effects of Whitmore's influence had persisted through multiple generations. "My great-grandmother Martha never recovered from what happened in that church," Mary told Dr. Vance. "She spent the rest of her life claiming she could see and speak with the people who had disappeared. She said they visited her regularly, trying to convince her to join them. The family thought she was losing her mind, but now I'm not so sure." Mary Henderson's account included details that had never appeared in official records. According to family tradition, Martha Henderson had continued to practice rituals learned from Whitmore long after the preacher's departure from Cedar Hollow. These practices, passed down through the female line of the family, involved what Mary described as ways of communicating with those who had crossed over. Dr. Vance's research was interrupted in November 1991 when she reported experiencing what she described as supernatural harassment related to her investigation. According to her final research notes, she had begun receiving nocturnal visits from figures who claimed to be the missing persons from both historical and contemporary cases. "They appear in my bedroom at night," Dr. A.T. Vance wrote in her journal entry dated November 15, 1991, "They look exactly as they would have in life, but there's something wrong with their eyes. They speak in that same unknown language that appears in the historical records. They seem to be trying to convince me to join them, to participate in some kind of ceremony that would allow me to understand the truth." Dr. Vance's research concluded abruptly when she took an indefinite leave of absence from Arkansas State University in December 1991. Her colleagues reported that she had become increasingly paranoid and had expressed fears that she was being watched by unknown individuals. Her current whereabouts are unknown. The most recent incident connected to the Cedar Hollow case occurred in 2003, when digital technology provided new tools for investigating the persistent mysteries of the region. A team of paranormal researchers, led by Dr. Michael Reeves of the Institute for Paranormal Studies, conducted an extensive investigation of the abandoned Cedar Hollow Baptist Church using advanced recording equipment and thermal imaging technology. Dr. Reeves's team documented several anomalous phenomena during their investigation. Thermal imaging revealed cold spots in the church basement that corresponded exactly to the locations of the symbols carved into the walls. Digital audio recordings captured what Dr. Reeves described as vocalizations in an unknown language that occurred at regular intervals throughout the night. Most significantly, the team's video equipment recorded what appeared to be human figures moving through the basement, despite the fact that all team members were accounted for at the time of the recordings. Analysis of the video footage revealed figures that seemed to lack the thermal signatures that would be expected from living humans. Dr. Reeves's preliminary report, published in the Journal of Paranormal Research in 2004, concluded that the Cedar Hollow site exhibited persistent, anomalous phenomena consistent with theories of location-based supernatural activity. However, the investigation was terminated when 2 team members reported psychological effects similar to those experienced by previous researchers. The team's final night at the site, according to Dr. Reeves' personal notes, involved direct contact with entities that claimed to be the original missing persons from 1902. These entities, appearing as translucent figures in the basement, communicated through what Dr. Reeves described as direct mental transmission rather than spoken language. They showed us visions of what they called the true nature of reality, Dr. Reeves wrote in his final report. These visions suggested that our conventional understanding of life and death is fundamentally flawed. They claimed that Whitmore had discovered methods for transcending physical existence and that those who had disappeared had actually achieved a higher form of consciousness. The investigation concluded when team member Sarah Collins disappeared during the final night of recording. Collins was found 3 days later in the basement of the church, alive, but in a catatonic state. She was hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation and has never provided a coherent account of her experience. Collins's medical records, obtained through legal channels in 2010, reveal that she emerged from her catatonic state after 6 weeks of treatment. However, her behavior remained altered in ways that medical professionals could not explain. She claimed to possess knowledge of events and people she had never encountered, and demonstrated an ability to speak in the same unknown language documented in the historical records. The case of Samuel Whitmore and the Cedar Hollow Baptist Church represents one of the most thoroughly documented yet persistently inexplicable incidents in American religious history. Over the course of more than a century, multiple investigators have attempted to provide rational explanations for the events of 1902 and their apparent continuation into the present day. The official explanation, as recorded in Newton County records, attributes the original disappearances to the harsh conditions of frontier life and the psychological effects of religious extremism. This explanation, while satisfying from a legal standpoint, fails to account for the physical evidence, the consistency of witness testimony across multiple generations, and the persistence of similar phenomena in the region. The academic investigations conducted by Dr. Hartwell, Dr. Vance, and Dr. Reeves suggest that the Cedar Hollow incidents represent something beyond conventional criminal activity or psychological disorder. The consistency of the symbols, the persistence of the unknown language, and the apparent ability of the phenomena to affect multiple generations of researchers point to something that challenges our fundamental understanding of reality. Perhaps most disturbing is the implication that Samuel Whitmore's activities in 1902 created some form of permanent alteration to the fabric of reality in the Cedar Hollow region. The evidence suggests that whatever doorways Whitmore opened during his ceremonies remain active, continuing to affect those who encounter them more than a century later. The pattern is consistent across all documented cases. Initial contact with the phenomena leads to psychological changes, followed by claims of communication with the missing persons, and ultimately to disappearance or permanent psychological alteration. Those who survive the experience are forever changed, carrying knowledge and abilities that they cannot explain or control. For those who might encounter similar phenomena, the historical record provides clear warnings. The entities that claim to be the missing persons from Cedar Hollow demonstrate knowledge and abilities that suggest they are not what they appear to be. They speak with familiar voices and wear familiar faces, but their true nature remains unknown and potentially dangerous. If you encounter individuals who claim to be conducting religious ceremonies involving unknown symbols or languages, if you hear voices calling your name from empty buildings or isolated locations, if you see figures that move in ways that seem somehow wrong, do not investigate. Do not respond. Do not allow curiosity to overcome caution. The doorways that Samuel Whitmore opened in 1902 remain open. The entities that emerge through those doorways continue to seek new participants in their ceremonies. They offer knowledge and transcendence, but the price of that knowledge may be higher than any rational person would willingly pay. 23 members of Whitmore's congregation entered those doorways in 1902. None returned unchanged. The others, they may be closer than you think, wearing familiar faces, speaking with familiar voices, waiting for the next opportunity to share their terrible knowledge with the living. The Cedar Hollow Baptist Church still stands, abandoned and decaying in the Arkansas wilderness. The basement where Whitmore conducted his ceremonies remains accessible to those determined enough to find it. But perhaps some doors are meant to remain closed, and some knowledge is too dangerous to seek. Remember, they look like people you once knew, but they are not who they appear to be. And once you hear their voices calling your name, it may already be too late to turn back.